At 92 years old, Sir Michael Caine, the legend who defined generations of cinema, now faces a tragedy so painful it has left fans around the world stunned. For decades, he was the man with the unshakable voice, the sharp wit, the unbreakable spirit. But today, that strength is being tested in a way no one ever expected. What happened behind closed doors has finally come to light, and the truth is far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Here's the story the world needs to hear. Michael Caine wasn't always a movie star. Before the red carpets, the Oscars, and the global fame, he was just a boy named Maurice Micklewhite, growing up in the middle of chaos in South London. Born in 1933, he came into a world already on the edge of war. His earliest memories weren't of toys or birthdays, but of sirens wailing through the night and his mother pulling him into bomb shelters as German planes flew overhead during the Blitz. Their home was surrounded by ruins, and survival became the first thing he ever learned. His childhood was rough. His father worked as a porter at the fish market. His mother cleaned houses. They didn't have much, but they had each other. For a short time, he was evacuated to a foster home in the countryside to escape the bombing. But instead of peace, he faced cruelty. The woman who was supposed to protect him beat him with a belt, and he was left locked in rooms for hours. It was his mother, Ellen, who eventually came and pulled him out. That moment, he later said, was when he truly learned what love and loyalty meant. After the war, life didn't get easier. Britain was broken, and so were the people. Food was rationed, jobs were hard to find. Caine worked whatever he could: messenger, filing clerk, even time in a factory. But it wasn't enough. He needed something more, something that made sense of the pain he'd seen and felt. That something he found in acting. It didn't come fast. In fact, it barely came at all. He was constantly turned down, often mocked for his Cockney accent. One agent told him to learn to speak properly if he ever wanted a role. But he kept pushing. He took any part he could, often uncredited, just to be on set. He changed his name to Michael Caine, inspired by the Humphrey Bogart film The Caine Mutiny. That new name gave him confidence, a fresh start. Then came Zulu in 1964. A breakthrough. Suddenly, people were paying attention. Then the Ipcress File. Then Alfie. In just a few short years, he went from unknown to icon. But fame didn't erase his past. He never forgot the bombed streets, the hunger, or the fear. In fact, they became his fuel. Every role he played, every line he delivered, carried the weight of a boy who had once sat under rubble and wondered if the next bomb would be the last. Michael Caine didn't become a star by luck. He became one because he survived when life gave him every reason not to. His story isn't just about acting. It's about endurance, grit, and the fire that forges a soul stronger than steel. Michael Caine has always had that unmistakable presence. The voice, the stare, the calm, collected attitude. To the world, he was the guy who always seemed to have it together, the sharp-dressed Brit with the quick wit and steady hand. But behind the fame, the film sets, and the trophies, there was a man who carried more loss and heartache than most people ever saw. It's easy to think of Michael Caine as invincible. After all, he's played spies, gangsters, mentors, millionaires, always with a sense of cool that made people believe nothing could shake him. But life off camera wasn't always so composed. He's known what it means to grieve deeply and quietly, without the world ever seeing the tears. The first big blow came when he was still young. His father, Maurice Micklewhite Sr., a fish market porter, was a tough and distant figure in his life. They didn't have the warmest bond, but losing him was still a punch to the chest. He was only 21 when his father died of liver cancer. Caine didn't talk much about it at the time. Back then, men didn't, especially working-class men. You just kept going, but that grief stayed with him. It was the first time he understood how quickly life could change, how suddenly someone you've always known can just be gone. But perhaps the most painful private loss of all came decades later, something he didn't even learn about until much later in life. Michael had a brother, Stanley, who suffered from severe epilepsy and developmental issues. Stanley spent most of his life in a psychiatric hospital, out of sight, out of the public eye. Michael didn't even know the full truth until after his mother passed away. She had kept Stanley's condition a secret, even from Michael, for most of their lives. When he found out, the guilt was overwhelming. Here he was, a man celebrated across the world, living a life of wealth and admiration, while his brother had been hidden away, living in silence and shadows. Caine later said it was one of the heaviest truths he'd ever had to live with. And though he didn't blame his mother, times were different back then, and families were often forced to make heartbreaking decisions. The pain of not knowing, of not being there, never truly left him. And then there was the pressure. The public always saw the success, the blockbuster roles, the interviews, the awards. But behind the scenes, Caine dealt with the same insecurities and fears that haunt every human being. There were times when the roles dried up, when the phone didn't ring, when critics were cruel and box office numbers didn't match expectations. For a man whose identity was built on being relevant, those quiet spells were terrifying. He also battled with alcohol in his earlier years. Like many stars from his generation, he used it as a shield, a way to ease the stress, the expectations, the constant need to perform. But over time, he realized it was becoming a weight rather than a release. He made the decision to cut back and eventually quit, especially when he became a father. It was a conscious choice to be present, to protect what really mattered, his family. And through all this, his anchor has always been Shakira, his wife of over 50 years. Their marriage is one of the rare love stories in show business that actually lasted. He often says she saved him from the chaos of Hollywood, from himself, from the temptations that could have ruined everything. But even their journey wasn't always smooth. They faced the pressures of raising a family in the spotlight, of navigating fame without losing their footing. And behind their smiles were private fears, illness, aging, the kind of quiet struggles every couple endures but rarely shares. In more recent years, Caine has spoken more openly about aging and the fear of losing his independence. Health issues have slowed him down. He's walked with a cane. He's had surgeries. He's turned down more roles. And each time he does, it's a reminder that the curtain will one day close, not just on his career, but on the life he's built brick by brick. And yet, despite the losses, despite the pain, Michael Caine has always chosen resilience. He kept showing up not just on screen, but for his family, his friends, and even his fans. He knew that grief was part of life, that silence didn't mean absence, and that strength wasn't about pretending to be okay. It was about carrying on, even when you weren't. Behind every red carpet photo and every classic film clip is a man who has been through fire, a man who has said goodbye to loved ones, questioned his path, wrestled with guilt, and grown older in front of millions of eyes. And yet, he kept his dignity. He kept his humor. He kept his love for the craft and the people who supported him. Michael Caine's story isn't just about acting. It's about surviving. It's about staying soft in a world that can be so hard. It's about private pain and public courage, and how sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply keep going when everything around you says stop. There comes a time in every person's life when the body starts sending quiet signals, a slower step, a tighter joint, a forgotten word. And for Sir Michael Caine, a man who had spent his entire life in motion, on sets, in interviews, on red carpets, those signals grew louder with every passing year. What started as minor annoyances slowly became daily obstacles. The body that once carried him through action scenes and whirlwind world tours was no longer on his side. It had started to revolt. For decades, Caine had defied time. While his peers retired or faded from view, he kept going. He worked well into his 80s, delivering lines with the same sharpness and weight as he did in his 30s. Fans admired him for it. "Michael never slows down," they'd say. But behind the curtain, that wasn't exactly true. He was slowing down. He just didn't want anyone to see it. The first signs were easy to brush off. A stumble here, a forgotten name there. He told himself it was nothing, just old age, just being tired. But then came the falls. A couple of serious ones, actually. One, in particular, landed him in the hospital. He joked about it in interviews, calling it just bad luck. But those closest to him knew better. He was scared, not just of getting hurt, but of losing the independence he valued so much. Eventually, he had to start using a cane. That was a big moment for him, not because he minded the support, but because it made things real. He wasn't just aging, he was aging out of the life he had built. And with each medical appointment, each new pill added to the growing list on his nightstand, the truth became harder to ignore. His body was failing him. There were talks of surgeries. His back gave him trouble. His legs were weaker. Tasks that once felt simple, getting up from a chair, walking across the room, now felt like challenges he had to prepare for. But what made it worse was what was happening inside his mind. Michael Caine had always been razor sharp. His memory, his timing, his ability to read a script once and remember pages of dialogue. It had been a point of pride, but in recent years, even that began to shift. He found himself searching for words, losing his train of thought mid-sentence. In private, he grew frustrated. He'd grip the sides of his chair, close his eyes, and will the word to return. Sometimes it would, sometimes it wouldn't. Still, he smiled in public. Still, he showed up. But inside, he was grieving the man he used to be. The truth is, no amount of fame or fortune can stop the body's decline. Caine had wealth. He had the best doctors, the finest care, but aging doesn't care about status. It humbles everyone in the end, even the legends. What many didn't see was how deeply personal this battle became. Caine had always been strong for others, for his wife, Shakira, who stood by him for over 50 years, for his daughters who saw him not as a movie star, but as their dad, for his fans who still tuned in, still cheered when he appeared on screen. He didn't want to let anyone down, so he fought. He changed his diet. He gave up alcohol. He exercised. He went to physical therapy. He followed every instruction, not because he believed he could stop aging, but because he wanted more time, more walks with his wife, more laughter with his grandchildren, more sunrises, more stories. But even as he did everything right, the body had its own plan. In interviews, you could start to see it. The pauses, the weariness, the gentle tremor in his hands. He wasn't acting anymore. He was enduring. He'd talk about the end more openly, not as something scary, but as something real, something coming. And he was making peace with it. He once said, "You come into this world with nothing, and you leave with nothing. What matters is what you do in between." And by that measure, Michael Caine had done more than most. But still, letting go of the man he once was wasn't easy. There were fewer public appearances, fewer film roles, until eventually, none. Caine announced his retirement, not with tears but with gratitude. He said he wanted to spend his remaining days with his family, in peace, enjoying the life he had worked so hard to build. But retirement didn't mean the battle was over. The quiet days were filled with reminders of what was slipping away. He could no longer travel like he used to. Long walks turned into short ones. Phone calls became tiring. The days grew slower, softer. And then came the harder moments, the ones no one likes to talk about. The nights when sleep wouldn't come. The days when the pain was too much. The loneliness of being in a room full of people and still feeling like no one could understand the storm happening inside your skin. That's the truth about aging. It's not just about wrinkles and gray hair. It's about loss. Loss of strength, loss of ability, sometimes even loss of self. But through it all, Caine never stopped being grateful. He often said he was lucky to have made it this far, lucky to have a wife who loved him, lucky to have lived his dream. And when you looked into his eyes, even as his body grew weaker, there was still that spark, that stubborn, resilient spark that said, "I'm still here." In the end, Sir Michael Caine's final battle isn't one of tragedy, it's one of truth. The truth that none of us escape the body's revolt. The truth that even icons are human. And the truth that dignity doesn't come from staying strong, it comes from letting go with grace. He may no longer grace the screen. His voice may no longer echo through theaters. But his spirit, his legacy, the life he built, that lives on. Because while the body gives out, the impact doesn't. Michael Caine's final act is not a fall. It's a quiet bow. A long, heartfelt goodbye from a man who gave everything he had, right until the end. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels full of memories, full of love, full of the soft echoes of a life that's been well lived. That's the kind of silence that surrounds Sir Michael Caine now. It's not the roar of movie premieres, the clicking of cameras, or the bustle of interviews. It's something deeper, something softer. It's peace. After decades of being in the spotlight, of being the man, the actor, the voice, the presence, Michael slowly stepped away. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't some dramatic exit. It was more like the closing of a curtain after a long and unforgettable play. One final bow and then quiet. In truth, Michael had been preparing for this for a while. Retirement wasn't some forced decision, though his health certainly made it feel more urgent. No. This was something he had come to on his own, a choice to slow down, a choice to spend the time he had left not on set, not in costume, but at home, with his wife, with his family, with himself. He once said in an interview, "I'm not retiring because I don't love acting. I'm retiring because I love living." That one sentence said it all. His home became his world. No longer was he flying across continents, waking up in hotel rooms, or memorizing lines late into the night. Instead, mornings were slower. Tea in the kitchen, music in the background, walks in the garden, even if they were shorter now. He traded red carpets for real conversations, scripts for stories told to his grandchildren, and for once, time didn't feel like a deadline. It just existed, gently. His wife, Shakira, was always by his side. Their love story, one of the quietest and strongest in Hollywood, only deepened in these later years. She had seen him at his highest, and now, in these final chapters, she stood by him with the same grace and strength that had held them together through decades. He often said she saved his life, and you could tell he meant it. Every look, every smile between them carried years of unspoken understanding. Their home became a kind of sanctuary. Friends would come by, not as fans or colleagues, but as companions. The conversations weren't about box office numbers or award shows. They were about memories, about moments, about laughter. He'd tell stories, not rehearsed ones, but the ones that mattered. The ones about childhood, war, failure, love, and joy. And those who listened always left with something more than they came with. Because when Michael spoke, you listened. Not because he demanded attention, but because he deserved it. There was something poetic about the way he lived this final chapter. He didn't chase legacy. He had already built it. He didn't fight the passage of time. He accepted it. He knew that the greatest roles of his life weren't always on screen. They were the roles of husband, father, friend, and now, grandfather. He didn't need to be remembered as a star. He just wanted to be remembered as someone who tried, who gave his best, who made people feel something. And people did feel. Even now, long after his last appearance, fans still revisit his work. They rewatch The Dark Knight, The Cider House Rules, The Italian Job, and so many others. Not just for entertainment, but for comfort. His voice, steady and warm, is like a lighthouse in the storm. Reassuring, familiar, safe. That's part of his legacy, not just the films, but the feeling. And as the spotlight faded, something else grew brighter. His reflection. He looked back on his life with clarity, not regret. He acknowledged his mistakes, his flaws, but didn't dwell in them. He owned his story, all of it. From the bombed-out streets of London during World War II to the glamorous hills of Hollywood. From hunger and rejection to global fame and generational influence. He had lived many lives in one, and now he was ready to just be. What surprised many was how content he became with simplicity. No cameras, no applause, just the rustle of trees, the smell of home-cooked meals, the sound of his loved ones laughing nearby. He didn't need validation anymore. He had found something richer, peace. There were moments of reflection, of course. Nights when old memories visited, friends he had lost, roles he had turned down, roads he never took. But instead of sorrow, he met those thoughts with a kind of quiet respect. Everything had led him here, to this moment, this life. This gentle twilight. The world still talked about him. Articles were written, tributes aired. People called him a legend, a giant, an icon. But if you asked him, he would just smile and say, "I was a working actor. I did my job." That humility, that grounded truth, was perhaps his greatest gift to the world. Now, as time continues to pass, the spotlight that once followed him has dimmed. And yet, in the hearts of millions, he still shines. Not just because of the characters he played, but because of the life he lived off-screen. Michael Caine didn't leave the stage with a bang. He left with a whisper, a soft, enduring echo of someone who rose from nothing, gave everything, and in the end asked for nothing more than love, peace, and a place to rest. And in that rest, he found the most honest kind of legacy, not built on fame or fortune, but on truth. So while the camera no longer rolls and the stage lights have gone dark, Michael Caine remains. In every scene, in every heart, in every moment where grace matters more than glamour. Because some stars don't fade, they just go home.